we just did our weird game segment where we once again looked at all manner of crazy game ideas and concepts. And with Josh joining us, he comes at it from, again, playing mostly AAA titles. Again, he's an Xbox One player. He doesn't really look at too many on the indie sides. So, like, some of the games that we mentioned there, again, like, for us, like, we are, hardened to the horrors of some of these titles. But for him, like, it sounds like legitimate ideas, or at least an idea that could be developed and sold if it was put under the right presentation, the right light. And I think that is a very interesting topic, especially when it comes to independent developers and first-timers. Like, how do you show these games? Like, what would be considered like the right and the wrong way of trying to get someone to play your game? And again, this could easily fill like an hour and a half discussion, like just on us. But I'm going to throw things over to you first, Josh, for this, since again you're kind of like our new guest here. Like, we mentioned some very crazy ideas for video games. We mentioned like some of these weird platformers, just like crazy games just based on screenshots or titles. Like, if you saw this on XBLA, what would get you to play them?
If a streamer talked about it, if a YouTuber had talked about it, if I had seen somebody playing it and experiencing it, something that I could kind of project myself on and then kind of gauge whether or not I would find that interesting or fun, right? But I also it got to be clear that just because I wouldn't buy something doesn't invalidate the concept, right? Like, what were you gonna say?
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think that is the best, most ideal way for if an indie developer could get streamers to play, like popular streamers to play their game, or reviewers. The games we mentioned, or the ones we skipped, which of that 90%, 50% are hentai related. That's the thing you get to miss, not looking at these titles. But they will never see the light of day as far as like a popular, like any of those articles you mentioned, or Kotaku specifically. If any of these guys could get a write-up on there, they would love it. Even if it was like, this is the worst game ever, because that means like 1,000 sales that day. I would love for them to be able to do that. And if I could recommend to them, based on my own experience, like how to even come close to that, some of these titles are ridiculous. Like, I feel like the hentai ones, of all of them, know their audience, and they just put that word in there, and they've got their attention of the audience. You got to be clear about what type of game you are. You kind of lead with the genre you're in, because like you say, if you're not into sports sims, why would anyone bother? Why would you want to buy a game that's called Soccer Hooligans or something like that if it's an RPG? Who knows? So you got to be very clear about what kind of game you are right off the bat, and have a screenshot that represents you, have a title screen that represents you, not just some like thing you made in MS Paint, from like 10 years ago, like Dust Up looked like it is. It's really just kind of common sense.
And last week when we were doing our segment, I brought this weird game that combined physics-based platforming, puzzle solving, and Magic the Gathering CCG gameplay. All together, it had some kind of crazy fantasy title to it. And, who's going to really be able to figure out what that game is? And it's very hard, I think, for a lot of developers to know just why should someone click on this game store page or anything like that. And as you were saying a few minutes ago, Rob, it's why we see all these games with the word hentai in the title. Because, that pretty much explains what this game is, in a millisecond.
Yeah.
For the three of us here, we go through a lot of games. And as you were saying earlier, Josh, that, for you, you're not going onto a store, to close your eyes and pick a game from a list somewhere. Generally, what you're looking for. And I'm the same way. I'm sure Rob's the same way as well. Nobody, I think, not one common consumer is just going to go on a store one day and say, I want to buy a game that begins with the letter L. And the first game that pops up, I don't care what it is, I'm going to buy it right then and there. Now, the title that we brought up during the Weird Games segment that kind of framed this discussion was this platformer called Trans-Shaping, which is trying to be both a platformer game, but also raise awareness for transgender issues. And like we said, like there are people who will probably buy that game just on the idea that it supports trans rights. And there are probably going to be, unfortunately, people who are going to not buy that game simply because that's mentioned in the very first line of that description. And here's the tough question. I think this is going to kind of get a little bit, this may get a little depressing and cynical, but is there a way to reach that latter audience? Or do you think like they're just done? Like just by even having the word trans in the title, they're not going to buy this game no matter what kind of marketing spin you would put on it.
And I mean, I'm generally a fan of sneaking it in, right? Yeah. Sneaking it in is even the wrong word, right? Trojan horse, like you got it. Yeah, like it's putting using allegory to just a political messaging, right? Mm-hmm. And that's also like a tactical way of looking at it, in that if you want to spread your message, right? Well, certainly that group that you talked about, that group that is going to read those words and then go 100 miles away just because it says those words, that group is not a particularly self-reflective group, big on being aware of their prejudices or biases or whatever, right? So if you're trying, if the target audience is an audience that doesn't like to go outside of its bounds, then the way to reach that audience is, if you're trying to reach them, is to put it inside, sneak it in through some other way. Call it shapers.
I think actually Sims did a good job of that. Like they just kind of, they just shrug. It's like, it's there, whatever, it's there. You can do it if you want, if you don't, whatever. But you can't really, it's a part of the game, but you don't have to visit with it at all. And they don't draw attention to it. You have all these other groups drawing attention to it, but they're just like, yeah, whatever. It's Sims. Do what you want. It's a sandbox. Go for it.
Mm-hmm. And what Mike was saying a few minutes ago about the name sounds clickbait trollbait. Is it a serious game? And it's very easy, I think, for a lot of people to immediately dismiss that as being snide. But unfortunately, this is kind of the case that like Rob and I run into when we do these segments, that there are so many games being released. And again, like for you, Josh, like staying with the AAA side, like you are not exposed to this. Like we are opening your eyes to both the beauty and horror of the independent scene. When you're trying to do something legitimately, even if it is either going to be a hardcore game or again something that's trying to promote or raise awareness, how do you avoid that stigma that someone doesn't just associate your game as just being, the LGBT plus equivalent of, Trump build the wall, the game, or something like that?
Well, I think that's, it's what we're actually we're not talking about marketing against. If I see a game called Trans something, right? Mm-hmm. And my response is automatically to think, is this not serious? Mm-hmm. Is this less than serious, right? I'm telling you about me because I could also, by that same right, what makes that less serious than a game called Call of Duty?
Or Anthem, right? Or... If
I'm an Iraqi, right, and you tell me you love these games, you think every game should be called Call of Duty, and it should be about this feeling of how honorable and how noble it is to go blow up somebody's house 10,000 miles away. Why is that serious? Why do you get to say that's serious? But then if I say, hey, I maybe think about gender differently than you, please don't shit on me, right? That's not serious? In a way that, do you understand? Yeah. Like, it depends on who the audience is, and right, we're proving the fact that the audience still can't accept that somebody, if you look at a Trump game and say that's not serious, or you look at a trans game and you say that's not serious, but you also look at a game that is super into the NBA, the consumption and the wealth of being an NBA star, right? You think that's automatically serious. That gets in the serious door, but the trans game doesn't, or the hentai game doesn't, whatever. I don't mean to equate those two things, but we're telling you about ourselves. We're not telling you about what anything to do with what that game software is, what the game design is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, that's well said.
And it's very hard, I think, for a lot of people, again, for people who see this on a day-to-day basis, not to become conditioned for it. Like, there are games that we look on, when I look on Keymailer, that on immediately first glance, it looks like crap. It looks like something, again, somebody just spent 2 days trying to make. But then when I clicked on it, I was like, wait a minute, there is potential here. Everybody who's watched knows we played Brocat on stream a few months ago, and that's a game that I'm sure maybe like 10 to 15 people may have bought that game. But it turns out it wasn't that bad. But unfortunately, again, it's that whole issue of, one rotten apple spoils the bunch. That if somebody tries to make a game and it completely fails or purposely just tries to spark controversy, then people are going to start to assume that's the norm. I mean, is there a way to, square that circle or get around that issue when it comes to the greater market?
That's super difficult because, I do like playing with RPG Maker, and I know how powerful of a platform it is, and it does. When I see an RPG, even when I look at a game and I'm like, oh, that was done in RPG Maker, why would I spend $5 on that? Like, to me, I'm like, well, maybe I want to make an RPG Maker game someday and be taken seriously. I think part of it is that you want to try to not look so much like you were made in RPG Maker. That belittles it a little bit, but because you certainly can make any art you want, it doesn't have to look like that. There are steps you can take to kind of let yourself be taken a little more seriously, like not being that's the engine I made it in right off of the bat. But it's hard to get past that thought process. Like, oh, that guy wasn't serious about being a game developer because
he only used RPG Maker,
right? Or what is the other one? Game Maker. Just Game Maker unto itself is kind of like the cheap version of Unity. Which is lesser than Unreal. Like they have these stigmas to them, even though great games have been made with all of those platforms.
And Unity is the principal example. Again, and I know we've had this discussion many times in chat. There are people who associate Unity with just pure crap. Who, if the second they see that made in Unity splash screen, go, "This is some shovelware $2 game. Why should I give a crap about it?" But so many games are made in Unity these days. A Vision Soft Reset that we played on stream. That is an amazing Metroidvania game that deserves a lot more praise and credit, which I don't think it's going to get, and that's just my cynicism, I think, coming through. But we kind of talked over there for a second there, Josh. What do you make of, again, that kind of issue of so many games kind of poisoning it for everybody else?
I think that consumer you described there, if I'm a consumer and I am browsing a store and I know things like I know what RPG Maker is, and I know what Game Maker is, and I know what Unity is, and I know what Unreal is, and I know the differences between those things vis-a-vis game developments, I don't know if I'm a developer, right? I don't know what kind of budget do you devote to solving that problem.
But here's, I guess, my final thoughts, and I'm sure we can bring this up again. The issue, as you were saying, Josh, that it's not a case of saying, about these stores not accepting these games, of saying that do not make this game because nobody's going to want to buy it. There are people who want to buy it. It's just going to be a challenge of getting to them. And again, that is a store issue and another big point. But as we were saying, like over this whole cast, even beyond that, or beyond just this discussion, it's always been about moving that needle. We brought up Assassin's Creed, and I remember when we had this discussion just between the two of us like a few months ago about how big of a deal it was for Assassin's Creed Odyssey to have a legitimate female character. She's not, the character you create. She's not, thrown in for, just, here's a woman, play as her. This is a legitimate character who you can play the game as if you want to play as her, or you can play as the male character. And that takes a lot to get to that point. Just as it was to get to the point of even just having a female character, even just be an option. Again, like, we went many years before, outside of, again, like the few rare exceptions like Samus or Lara Croft, that you could build a game and have a female character be the main one. And it is, I think, again, like as we always say with these topics, it's just going to take time. Maybe in 5 to 10 years from now, that when somebody mentions a game that's going to be talking about trans rights, that could just be the norm. That could be, the same thing as discussing, again, the umpteenth Call of Duty game, or the umpteenth Battle Royale title. But you don't know, or we won't know that until we start to see, things start to move forward, I guess.
Looking forward to those times, and then we get to find out what's racy and edgy that at that particular point in time. It'll be interesting.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoy things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.